This is the first video on straight line graphs, and we will be starting with a given line graph of which you must find the equation. Okay, the general formula for a straight line graph is either y equals ax plus b or y equals mx plus c. This is the more common one, and remember this is also the name of your textbook. Okay, the M stands for the gradient, and the gradient, people, stands for the steepness. Okay, this is more steep, more steep. All of these are negative gradients. If you go to this side and the line lies like this, then it is a very high positive value, and going further down is less steep, and then your value will be less. Okay, now they are giving you the straight line graph, and they are asking you to find the gradient as well as the y-intercept, and from that you can find the equation. So when you have a look at how steep the line is, then we are talking about the gradient. And for the gradient, people, you must know the formula m equals the change in y divided by the change in x. Or you can also write that as y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. The 2 and the 1 can be swapped. It makes absolutely no difference. But what it is that you are actually having to get two coordinates. One we call the number 2, and the other one we call the number 1. So when you find two coordinates, importantly, people, always choose a point where the line graph crosses accurately on an intersection. Okay, an intersection, I mean this, that it crosses exactly there and not in between anywhere, because then it's very difficult to read off the coordinate. So this I'm going to call coordinate 1. Okay, and when it cuts the y-axis, people, this is always the easiest to choose, the x and the y-axis. I'm going to call that coordinate 2. All right, now for both of these, you have to read off the coordinate. So if we look at this one, this is where x is -3 and y is 0. That's why it's easy to take an x-intercept, because then y is always 0. And if you look at number 2, then the x value is 0 and the y value is -2. So find your two coordinates and ensure that they are crossing accurately on one of the intersections of the grid or the Cartesian plane graph paper, and then read off your two coordinates. Now what you do, you're just simply going to substitute that into the formula. So if you look at y, this is point 2, y2 is -2, okay, over x2 is 0. Then comes a minus, and then read off the y1, which is 0, and the x1, which is -3. Okay, and that you can calculate, which gives me -2 over negative, and a negative gives me a positive 3. So my gradient is -2/3. If I now look at the formula, people, then that belongs into the place of m. Okay, then the second point, which is the C, the y-intercept. The y-intercept simply means the point where the line crosses the y-axis. Okay, y-intercept. It is where it intercepts or crosses the y-axis. That's quite easy to remember. Okay, so when we now look at where it crosses the y-axis, then that really is at -2. Okay, That is all you need to calculate to get the equation. Now, if you just take your standard formula, you have calculated m as being 2/3. So in the place, or negative 2/3, in the place of m you write negative 2/3, and then comes the x, and then instead of c, you will write the y-intercept, which is -2 in this stage, and that is y equals negative 2/3 x minus 2. That is the equation for this straight line graph. Okay, so let's just go through what do you need to remember. You need to remember the standard formula, y equals mx plus c, and know that m stands for the gradient and c stands for the y-intercept. Then you need to know how to calculate the gradient, okay? The gradient is y change over x change. You will choose 2 points. You will read off the coordinates, and then you can subtract y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. I repeat here, it makes no difference if you put the 1 in front and then the 2. It makes no difference which way around you're going to subtract. But important is that you must subtract. Okay, then for the y-intercept, you must just remember that that is the point where the line crosses the y-axis. So that is only read off the graph. And then finally, to get the equation, you must just substitute the gradient m, which you calculated, as well as the y-intercept or c that you read off, and then you have your equation.